Oh, the streets are cold and grey, but the fire in our hearts won't stray from the pitch where dreams collide. We'll stand together side by side. Oh, when the Spurs go marching in, when the Spurs go marching in, I wanna be there in that number. Oh, when the Spurs go marching in, from the north to Wembley's light, under stars we own the night.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Project Spurs. There's 2 episodes this week, Joseph. This is unlike us because it's been pretty depressing as a Tottenham fan, as we all know. But we are back with the returning Sam from the Standard Sport. Obviously my therapist, regular friend, I guess, Joseph is also with us. It's not a therapy session today, but we are going to get into the finer details of all things Tottenham Hotspurs, I say, with Sam from the Standard Sport. Let's just keep everybody up to date with the situation that's happened since the last time we were on. Obviously, just getting into things around Tottenham. We sit 6 points adrift of Leeds United, someone I actually thought was a possibility of we might be able to have catched. But after a huge victory on Monday night at Manchester United, one of the first in several decades. So it doesn't rain, but it pours at Tottenham at the moment, just adding to further worrying concern around the club. Just to keep everybody up to date with some some injury news and news in and around training today. Christian Romero is rumoured to be out for the rest of the season, as I'm sure everybody is aware. Vicario was not seen in today's open training session, so that keeps the door open for Kingsley to start at the weekend, and I thought he played quite well last weekend against Sunderland. Let's hope any injury to his head as he's been recovered. That's for one. Otherwise, we're going to go down to Brandon Austin and then into our academy. But Rodrigo Bentancur was training today as well, which is great news. And somebody out on the pitch that perhaps I don't think many of us expected to see was one James Maddison. He was training with the first team. However, this is just part of his returned habilitation with the first team. He isn't due to be with the matchday squad anytime soon. But that's just keeping you up to date from when we were last really all together. Joseph, just coming to you. As I said, Monday night, I've got a gym built in my garage, so I sit and do some cardio during the first half, maybe a full game if it's a good game, like last night's Atletico Madrid Barcelona game. I felt like I was walking for miles last night watching that. Incredible. But Leeds United, they only went and won, didn't they? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't watching the first half, and one of my mates told me I was 2-0 Leeds, and I was like, you can't be serious, can't be 2-0 Leeds. Like, Man United have been on such good form with Michael Carrick, and you're thinking this should hopefully be an easy 3 points for United. And then, 2-0 up, and then I watched the second half after United went down to 10 men, controversially as well, I think a lot of people would say. And it still felt like United were going to get the extra goal, but everything that Leeds could do, and they did, and you know what? In the end, it was a great win for them. That's possibly kind of put them out of reach in terms of Tottenham, trying to catch them. And you've got to say they kind of deserve it. I mean, they play like a team. They play United. They are a United side, and Manchester United, as much they threw as much as they could at them, even with 10 men, they couldn't get through the defense. I mean, there was one moment where Dominic Calvert-Lewin headed it off the line. That's how desperate they are to win games. And I wish we had that same kind of energy in our squad. So, I said it in the group chat. Phil was quite frustrated watching the game. And I said, you know what, it's our own fault. We can't rely on other teams to be as crap as we are. And it's a shame, but it is what it is. If Tottenham want to get out of this, they've got to get out of it. And at the moment, that might be it feels a lot further away than what's going to happen at the moment.
Certainly does. But coming to you, Sam, well, obviously, first of all, welcome back. But interested to know your thoughts on the appointment of Roberto De Zerbi, and also We'll cover it later on, but how are we going to get out of this mess? But first of all, Sam, you've come back from Japan. How was Japan?
No, Japan was amazing. If anything, just to get away from Tottenham for a little bit, give myself a little bit of respite. But yeah, no, it was fantastic. It was a proper trip of a lifetime. So yeah, really, really nice. Thanks. I mean,
incredible. But yeah, the appointment of Roberto De Zerbi. Some of the initial thoughts when it happened.
It's a risk. It's a big risk, but you know, they were sort of left with no choice. He was certainly the best option on the market, but you know, history will tell you that this is a manager who takes time to instill his ideas. I think no Brighton manager has waited longer for their first win than De Zerbi. You've got Lewis Dunk and Van Hecker saying that, you know, initially they really sort of struggled with the complexity of his ideas, and it took time to get going. So there's certainly a risk there. But I liked how he spoke in the first press conference. He was confident. He seemed to have a plan for quite a lot of players within the squad. He seemed to know how they fit within his system. He was obviously disappointed with the loss of Kudus because that was a player that he'd really put at the centre of his plans. You could tell. He obviously tried to sign him, I think, whilst he was at Brighton. And yeah, he's frustrated to lose him. He's then frustrated to lose Romero, who will be out for the rest of the season. So yeah, it's the best appointment that could have been made in the situation, but regardless, it's a risk with, you know, such little time to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be a risk of any sort of appointment at this time of the season. 7 games, really, when he was coming in. I'm quite surprised that he did come in. There's so much talk about other people. So in and around your area and your fields and and maybe your group chats and things, was there anybody else that was ever really close? Because it sounded like it was Roberto De Zerbi and Roberto De Zerbi only.
Yeah, out of the serious candidates, for sure. I mean, there was obviously talk around sort of your Harry Redknapps and potentially Ryan Masons and people who, you know, quote unquote, got the club that sort of appointment. Those were rumoured, but they were never particularly serious options. I don't think the club, you know, that really would have been a last resort had that gone through. So no, I think De Zerbi was the only really credible candidate, certainly at this stage of the season, because, you know, when he took over, obviously 7 games to go, it's now 6 games to go. It's a thankless task for any manager to take on, and he's taken a massive risk, bargained on his reputation to take this job at that time.
Yeah, I mean, there was rumours about, you know, De Zerbi possibly coming to Tottenham before, but also kind of, I mean, I don't know how true some of those were, but, you know, him kind of being in the line when Tudor came in, but him not really wanting to accept that move, or maybe Tottenham not wanting to pay him that much. And then obviously what happened with Tudor, and we have to go back in for him, pay him a lot of money, you know, the 3rd most in the Premier League, which is quite crazy considering, you know, it's a 5-year deal. It looks like he's going to be with us for a while. You know, my first question for you, Sam, is a bit about kind of what you hear online about Tottenham. You know, I think we see, you know, we've seen it now from Ange Postecoglou for a while. There's been a steady kind of decline of Tottenham for, you know, since probably the Europa League win, and maybe even over a longer period of time than that. And I think media outlets have been very quick to jump on the manager to say, you know, Ange was an issue, now Frank was an issue, then Tudor was an issue, and now obviously De Zerbi's come in. First game was very poor. Let's be honest. You know, it was a very poor outing against Sunderland. They fully deserved the win, in my opinion. And, you know, we're on to our 3rd manager now with a different style. I just think people have been very quick to blame the managers as a problem, especially, again, media outlets have been very quick to look at, you know, the manager. And you hear them always constantly say that this group is too good to go down. And I think for a lot of Tottenham fans, we don't understand what some of these media outlets are saying, because, you know, you hear it and you're like, well, actually, these players haven't been performing for over a year. And, you know, I think a lot of Tottenham fans will say, well, the recruitment's been an issue, you know, the ownership not kind of spending the amount of money that they should be, kind of, you know, not paying the wages they need to be. You know, for you, what do you think is the main culprit for this situation Tottenham are in? Or maybe is it a combination of different parts? I mean, obviously, again, the injuries have been an issue, but I just think a lot of the times you hear, again, on commentary or in news articles, oh, you know, Thomas Frank was a real big issue. And I'm not saying he wasn't, but I just feel like we always kind of go away from the players and how poor they've been for a number of years now. And maybe that could be a system, maybe that could be something else. But what do you feel? How do you feel about that?
No, I think it's definitely sort of a combination. And I never sort of subscribe to the idea that the players are blameless, or even that the manager is the sole person to blame. I think the issue with the managers is the chopping and changing of the styles. And this is now a group that's made up of many different styles and many different approaches. And it sort of reflects in that, in the sense that they can't settle on one way of playing. I think, yeah, I've been quite sort of vocal in the idea that a lot of players are, it's not downing tools. I wouldn't say that the effort's not there, but they are neglecting responsibility, or certainly not coming to terms with, you know, quite what relegation would mean for Tottenham. I think you only have to look at Mickey van der Ven sending off against Crystal Palace and say, as the vice captain of the team, with Romero obviously at that point suspended, to make a decision like that and not let I think it was Sarr run through on goal. You let him run free because you understand, you know, a player who has the mental clarity would let Sarr run free. He wouldn't, you know, get himself sent off and basically sort of concede the game at that point. So there's plenty of examples of that. Romero, again, is also guilty of having done that at times this season. So, no, the players are by no means blameless. And if anything, yeah, they have escaped quite a bit of criticism. I think the sort of too good to go down is, you know, it's an argument. It's an easy argument to make. And it's obviously an argument based off the fact that these are good players at the core. But that kind of doesn't matter at this stage of the season. It's, you know, as De Zerbi has sort of said, it's he's a psychologist first and a football coach second for the final weeks of the season, because this isn't a tactical issue now. It's a case of mentality, and that's quite hard to sort of define, and it's quite hard to analyze and put into words, but that is ultimately where De Zerbi has to start if he's going to sort of turn things around. I would also say, I saw that comment, and I do totally agree that, you know, it's the board's decision making, whether that's the medical department or the managers that they've been hiring, and the sort of processes that they're going through to hire these managers, going from Postecoglou to Frank, which was a complete sort of change in approach, and then going to Tudor, and then going to De Zerbi, and all this sort of muddled thinking that obviously comes from the top. And so, you know, I'm not sure it's about putting into like an order who's most to blame, but certainly the board have to take a lot of stick for that.
I think they're probably at the top. Excuse me. I think they're probably number one. I think that would definitely start with Enoch as an ownership group. I think Daniel Levy was slotting in there at second. Vinay Venkatesham, it's been difficult. I get it, and I understand you've got to take over from someone that's been a club for 25 years, and that's difficult. That's been micromanaged everything. For all his faults in terms of Daniel Levy, I don't believe, hand on heart, he would have allowed the club to have got to the situation we are in now. I think he would have pulled the trigger earlier, especially around November, maybe even latest December, and there would have been some reaction. And I feel like, as an ownership group, Vinay in there, and especially Yang Lang, that there is a let's get through today and hope that it's okay tomorrow, but tomorrow just never comes. And at the moment, we're in free fall. I'm very concerned about the future of the club, not only the short term, but just from your sort of standpoint. Because obviously we're I know you're in it all the time talking about Tottenham, but you know, I think about it nearly every minute, it feels like at this point. Just from your standpoint, the sheer numbers You don't have to say, it's X amount or a range. How bad do you think this could get for a club of Tottenham's stature if we did get relegated?
In terms of finances, it would. I wouldn't say it would be crippling. That would be quite strong, but it would certainly have a massive, massive impact. I mean, there's obviously going to be, a slashing of the wage bill because players will inevitably leave, and they probably will leave this summer regardless. So that's one consideration. But yeah, the commercial revenue will go down. There's obviously would be less of an appetite for say concerts to take place and these things outside of football that bring in a lot of money for the club. How much appetite is there for them if they drop down a division? Who knows? Again, with the sponsors, those are all things that would probably they try to be renegotiating their position. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to give a strict figure or even like an approximation of where that could be, but I think it's fair to say that it would definitely be a big sort of strain on the club.
To be fair, I think there's kind of, for me anyway, there's a bit of an indifference, and this is a personal opinion, but I think part of it is obviously I don't want Tottenham to get relegated, but for me, from my anger towards the board, it will be nice to see them lose a lot of money because they deserve it because of how they've run the club. I mean, the way I look at it, the ship is sinking, and there is many holes. There's many holes in the ship. Again, injuries, player performances, recruitment. But at the end of the day, the captain is not doing anything about it, and is just allowing the water to fill on, and allowing the club to fall down into the Championship. And again, we'll talk about where we feel about survival. But for me, it feels like that Sunderland game was a massive one. It was a really, really big game for Tottenham, and they just didn't really show up for it. It didn't feel like they wanted it as much as Sunderland did. And that's definitely an issue. Like you said, the mentality and the feeling around it. I mean, we saw in De Zerbi's press conference saying about how, it's about the lack of confidence. He can see the ability, but it's the lack of confidence. And, for me, watching that game, I saw a lack of ability, but you definitely saw the mentality. You could see that the players were playing within themselves, not playing together, no cohesion and no belief. Once they went 1-0 down, there was never any kind of fight in them to get back into it. And that's the opposite of what we're seeing from West Ham and Leeds and Forest. There's always that fight and togetherness to get out of a situation. And that could lead us on to, departures, about these players. Are they here? Are they truly here and wanting to fight? I mean, a big one we saw was Romero going off injured on the weekends. The tears he had. I mean, for me personally, I believe those were tears for maybe not being able to play at the World Cup rather than maybe not being able to play for Tottenham for the rest of the season. I know that's up for debate, but we've seen him potentially play his last game for Spurs. What do you see happening for Cuti Romero this summer? Obviously just signed a new deal. There is some rumours that there might be some kind of release clause in there for some Spanish clubs. Again, only rumours on that. But it's hard to see his future in London right now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think regardless of whether Tottenham stay up or go down, I think Romero is probably one that you'd say is going to leave alongside probably Mickey van der Ven. And, it'd be wrong of me to sort of say that mentally they checked out or anything. I'm not sure we could sort of comment on that, on their character per se, but I think, it's certainly fair to say that they've let themselves down. There's been a dereliction of duty from two of the supposed leaders within the squad in terms of their decision-making on the pitch. And also you can argue the merits of it, but whether Romero's comments about the board, undermining the season quite a bit, undermining Frank as well when he was in charge, and sort of whether those conversations can be had privately, all of those sort of things have certainly contributed to the mess that is Spurs this season.
Just going back slightly in the timeline, obviously with Igor Tudor, do you feel in a way that perhaps Champions League football has been a bit of a hindrance to the football club in terms of not only Igor Tudor's reign, because I think if he hadn't got that victory against Atletico Madrid, he would have gone sooner. I think it was same with Thomas Frank. We were talking yesterday on Last Word on Spurs, and I came up with this argument as well that Thomas Frank was winning in the Champions League, but we couldn't perform in the Premier League, and it sort of felt that we were kicking the bucket along the road a little bit more. Do you feel that perhaps the Champions League has been a hindrance to us in terms of, again, the Premier League? I know that sounds pretty obvious, Gary, when we think about it, but also management, because we didn't act when we should have because, oh, well, we've won in the Champions League, or we're fourth in the Champions League group, or and I feel in a way that that's hindered us for not only survival but actual long-term development. Because if you look at last season, we were in a free fall anyway. The free fall has just essentially continued.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem has been the inability to translate those performances domestically, and that's kind of goes a little bit for the selection issues. Xavi Simons has started pretty much every game in the Champions League and has shown himself to be the player that we all sort of thought he could be in the Champions League. But then you go to the weekend and he's not playing, he's not in the starting lineup, and it's that sort of, there was a very clear sort of divide between how they wanted to play, how they wanted to set up in the Champions League, and how they wanted to do so in the Premier League. And I'm not sure. I feel like you can never criticize winning, basically. I think having that ability, to win is a good thing. And it's just been that failure to translate that's been the issue for me.
Something I'm just thinking about, again, all of these contributing factors to where Tottenham are at now. And if we go back even further and we think about how Daniel Levy obviously left the club at the start of the summer or middle of the summer kind of thing. And, that was a massive shock to a lot of people. And I think, you see every now and then on social media, people going, if Daniel Levy was here, would Tottenham be in this position? I mean, I guess who knows, but you still maybe feel like it could be. How do you feel on that about, Daniel Levy leaving and, where that's left Tottenham? Has it been a part of the reason we've gone down, or do you think this would have happened anyway with Daniel Levy at the helm?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously hard to say for sure. But I do agree that he probably would have acted more decisively. But also I think it must be, remembered that whilst they're sort of reframing this and rebranding this as a new era, and they've stepped out of the Daniel Levy era, so to say, ENIC and the people in charge have been in charge long before Daniel Levy left. And so these issues that are occurring now were occurring before. And so I'm not sure there's this sort of black and white divide between, Daniel Levy left and suddenly we left the Daniel Levy era behind. I think, ENIC have always been working in the background, and maybe they've sort of not shouldered the responsibility and haven't wanted to take any of that sort of blame for decision making, and only now are they doing that. But ultimately they've still been in charge, they've still been the power brokers at the club for quite a while, certainly a lot longer than, say, this season. So yeah, I think Daniel Levy's a shrewd operator. He's also pretty decisive, and yeah, he probably would have acted sooner, but there's definitely not this perceived new era, and I don't think that there was a sort of wholesale change that we've seen. Those people who've come in the background, we won't see the benefits of their work, if there are to be benefits from their work, until much later down the line. People like Rafi Merson and people like that, because they've only come into the role in the last sort of few months, so it's very hard for them to have an immediate impact. So yeah, I think it's hard to say, because it's the Daniel Levy era isn't necessarily over. I don't think it just stopped with him sort of leaving.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Effectively, the way the club is run it's being run in the same way. It's just a different.
They've rebranded. They've rebranded and reframed the narrative, but I don't think that much has particularly changed. No.
The only thing I like I said, and I think we're all in agreement with that, is perhaps he would have been more decisive quicker, which might have helped things. It could not have. We could have gone and got Igor Tudor earlier, and it just, didn't work. But we are where we are right now, and where we are right now is with Roberto De Zerbi. As you said, when he came in, I thought he spoke very well, spoke clearly, more about doesn't see the style needing to be something that's to be focused on right now, more of an arm around the shoulder, big brother or a father figure to the players. I think that's a really sensible way of doing it. Looking at the game at the weekend, I thought the first half I was happy, if that's possible, with the recent performances. However, the second half I thought it was much of the same. How did you view the game at the weekend?
Yeah, so obviously I was there at the game. I think first 10 minutes, I was impressed. Again, is probably a strong word, but certainly they made the early inroads. They created two sort of nice passing moves. There was one where Solanke broke in behind and pulled the ball back. I think it was Bergvall didn't quite connect with the pullback, and then Porro shoots. And then there's the one where Kolo Muani breaks through the middle and he finds Richarlison, who should really do better. Those are two nice moves that, they clearly will have worked on in the training ground. De Zerbi said that was a big part of his sort of decision to come to the club, was the ability to have, it must have been sort of 11, 12 days he had on the training ground with them. That's quite a long time. Managers don't necessarily get that much time to work with a squad. So you could see that early doors. And the first 10 minutes were promising, but I don't believe that Sunderland were particularly good. But what they did have was, a midfield who was capable of dominating, capable of taking the ball and just sort of playing it around Tottenham. And I think that really showed because, the issues that De Zerbi had at Marseille, a lot of it was around this fractured pressing where players weren't pressing together or coherently, and there were big gaps. And, Tottenham's press, in large parts, there were issues there because, I like Graham Bergvall, but they're very young players and they need, they should be playing around someone more senior. And if the person they're playing with is an out of form Conor Gallagher, then suddenly you've got a bit of an issue because that's not a particularly functional midfield. There were bright spots, but bright spots don't mean anything at this stage of the season. It needs to be better than that because, as say Jason Cundy put it, promising signs like that's, it means absolutely nothing. Results are of paramount importance. We're 6 games out from the end of the season.
Yeah, it's a worrying situation in terms of the performance from there, but the selection as well was something that I questioned. For me, if we're needing to progress the ball, and the most progressive player in our squad that's available in Xavi Simons gets 5 minutes. But I'm interested to hear what you think from being in and around the press conferences, because he spoke so highly of Xavi Simons. He spoke so highly of Richarlison and other players. But for me, I felt like almost certainly Xavi Simons was going to be a nailed-on starter, and he didn't. And we went with 3 effectively same type of players. And then when the changes were made, they were the same type of player again. So do you think that this is him just trying to talk up his squad publicly to get them a little bit of confidence? Or maybe it's the first day nerves, let's get this one in the bag and then start progressing on?
I agree. I think it was a shock among the press box that Xavi Simons wasn't starting because, you can say what you like about how he's played this season. And he has been hit on this, especially in the Premier League. But ultimately, he's the only fit and available creative outlet that Spurs have. And so you have to lean on that. This is a team with a real sort of dearth of talent when it comes to passing the ball and passing the ball forwards and being creative. So to leave him on the bench, it was a big surprise. It's definitely a big surprise. But also, in hindsight, having looked back at the, De Zerbi's comments pre-match, he was asked about Simons and he was asked about Gallagher. And whilst he sort of lavished Gallagher, someone, again, he tried to sign while at Brighton and name-checked him a couple times unprompted. With Simons, it was he was speaking more generally. He spoke about how he needs to fix the mental edge, the mental fragility, rather than their talent on the ball. But whereas Gallagher, he spoke, really fluently, and he didn't need to be asked twice. With Simmons, he was a little bit more hesitant, and so looking back, perhaps that was a little bit of a telltale sign. I think going forward, though, he has to lean on Simmons. It would just be wrong not to. I think that midfield combination didn't work, and it showed, and that was the reason really why Spurs lost that game.
I think it's really tough to really know. I mean, like we said, this team is kind of a combination of about 3 or 4 different styles, 3 or 4 different managers, kind of all muddled together, trying to get something out of them. And you wouldn't say that there's certain players in this squad that do suit what De Zerbi will want to do and how they wants to play. So, and I think one of the other things as well that I've noticed, there's going to be a lot of people talking about Brian Robbie after the game, about kind of some of the things that happened in the game, whether he should have got a yellow card, not got a yellow card in certain situations. But I'll tell you, I would have loved to have him up front for us in a relegation battle, more than a player like Solanke, due to his physical nature, his how he kind of just causes so many issues for defenders. And for Solanke, he was quite non-existent throughout the game, other than here or there, kind of a couple of chances where he didn't really make anything of them. I think it's clear to say, like you said, with Bergvall and Gray, 2 young players that we're kind of pinning all of our hopes on to keep us in the Premier League. Tottenham aren't set up for this challenge, are they? I don't think they ever thought a relegation battle was coming, and it feels like the players they've got. Maybe again, it is more mentally, and I'm maybe looking more at the profile, but it doesn't feel like these players are suited to this relegation battle as much as maybe some other teams have. I don't know if you feel the same on that.
No, that's definitely something I'd agree with. As you say, Spurs wouldn't have in their wildest dreams have thought that they would be down here battling relegation. That wasn't even a consideration in January, because the thoughts going into January, and it's obviously easy to say in hindsight, they got it wrong in January, but ultimately in January that hadn't even crossed their minds, because otherwise they would have been a bit more aggressive, I'm sure, in bringing in a winger, because that felt like a must. But they were convinced that they wanted to hold out to the summer, and they didn't want to take a stab at a player at say 30 mil, and in 18 months' time realize that, he helped us till the end of the season, but we don't really want him. He hasn't got a sell on. Tottenham have made a lot of signings like that in the past and have not been able to recoup the funds. So, that was definitely a fair consideration from the board. But ultimately, looking back, should they have taken the threat of relegation more seriously? I think they probably should have. And whilst, probably erring on the side of the board in regards to that decision making, I do think that a winger had to come in. I think that was the case before Brennan Johnson was sold. That was definitely the case once he was sold and Kudus got injured. And so not to bring in someone even on, say, an emergency loan, a Rashford-style deal, 6 months till the end of the season, that felt like an oversight from the start. But yeah, like when we talk about January in general, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to say that, they should have gone out and looked for these, tried to look for value where there wasn't value, because a lot of other clubs in the Premier League felt the same as Tottenham in that regard. That's why there was very little spending, except from perhaps Manchester City, who were buying ready-made talent. There definitely wasn't much value in the market. So yeah, when it comes to January, I think it's a little bit. The board got it wrong. The board got it right in certain aspects. I think it's hard to say it's just totally their fault.
I get where you were coming from, because also if you look at it back in January, we were like 13, 14 points off of West Ham. So at that point, we were like, if we pick up 1 or 2 wins, probably be okay. Yeah. Those wins just never come, as we all are fully aware. And West Ham went on an unbelievable run, but we were trying to be more reactive than proactive. And I think there was a proactiveness that has been missed a number of times, not just this season in January or even in the summer. It's been a continuation under the ownership. There is, and I'm sure you're fully aware of this, there is a lot of cries for an ownership change within the football club. There is people seem to be interested, and then nothing ever seems to come to fruition. If the inevitable is going to happen, because I'm going to be honest with you, Sam, if we lose at the weekend, for me, that it's over. Joseph is already in he feels it's over. I'm holding on for one more. For whatever reason I don't know. But in terms of an ownership change, the club's valuation will obviously go down. Do you feel that there might be an ownership change or something that may change? Or do you feel that this is just going to continue as it is until someone essentially pays what they want?
I mean, it certainly wouldn't be right for me to rule anything out. To be honest, I haven't heard either way whether they would or they wouldn't. They certainly haven't taken a strong stance on it. I think these things also take time, but Tottenham, even in the Championship, would still be an attractive proposition. It's London-based. The stadium's all financed. It's one of the best stadiums in the world. They obviously make plenty of revenue outside of football as well, and so it is an attractive proposition. And to be able to maximize that would, a lot of ownerships would, they'd see that challenge as appealing for sure. But yeah, right now, I mean, there's no sort of talk either way whether they would or they wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, again, this is just my kind of thinking. I couldn't imagine them selling the club whilst they're in the Championship. And maybe once they possibly got back promoted, whether they would straight away or not, who knows? But I think they'd only sell it at the top amount they feel like they can get, rather than jumping off the boat sooner rather than later. I think if we go back to, because again, I feel like relegation's inevitable now. I haven't seen enough from the team. There's no feeling in me that thinks we're going to get 3 wins from the last 6 games. We haven't had a win all year so far. It's hard to see anything changing that quickly. And there's going to be the conversation around these players, around the players at the club currently. Who's going to stay? Who's going to leave? I think a lot of fans would welcome some kind of clear out. I know I would. The team that gets Tottenham relegated, I'd be happy to see the back of many of them. But I'm sure there'll be a couple of players there that certain fans wouldn't love to see leave. Archie Gray has been really impressive this season, and I think a lot of people would love him to stay. Whether he could be drawn away from somebody else, I mean, it feels like inevitable that a big club would come in and try and buy him. But the same with many of our players. Do you have any kind of ideas who could possibly go and who may stay? I know it's quite a tough question right now, but it'll be interesting to know who would maybe stay with us in the Championship, and maybe who might be involved in the Championship. You have a lot of these young players out on loan. I for one would love to see Mikey Moore play for Spurs. Even if we stayed in the Premier League, I want to see him start for Spurs. So yeah, do you have any kind of rumblings on who you could see possibly go and who may stay?
Yeah, I mean, we at the Standard, we did the sort of squad audit maybe sort of a month or 2 ago. And yeah, I think it's probably easier to say who would stay rather than who would go, because I think it's the majority are probably going to leave. But I think Archie Gray is someone that you could definitely lean on in the Championship. I think he'd also be up for the challenge. I don't, he's maybe destined for bigger things, but I don't think he would let an ego get in the way of that. I think he'd quite relish the challenge of being the person to sort of restore Tottenham. I think another one who would potentially stay is a James Maddison. I think again that's someone who understands the club. He's also, because he hasn't played this season, he's maybe not emotionally, but he is still quite removed from this whole relegation situation, and so he's not tainted by it. I think he again would relish that challenge to go and play in the Championship with Tottenham and sort of be the centre of that team. I think also Dejan Kulusevski, there's an argument there that, again, because he hasn't played for so long, we don't necessarily know when he's coming back, that a circumstance dictates he might have to stay, just simply because of availability. And And again, Lucas Bergval's a funny one where I think he's probably destined for bigger things and he'll have plenty of interest. But I could see Tottenham negotiating with him that he stays on the premise that if they don't bounce straight back up, he leaves that next summer. I think you can definitely have that conversation with him. And then, yeah, I mean, in terms of players who are going to go, Porro would leave, Vicario would leave, Van der Ven, Romero, they all seem like they'd probably leave. I think that those are players who are, you know, I say in the primes of their careers, they're not playing particularly well right now, but age-wise, it's about their ambitions. And I think they would, you know, if they weren't already thinking about it, which I think they probably were, then, you know, relegation would really confirm that for them.
I think
yeah,
in the way they're playing, you can see they are. Maybe in the way they're playing, they're kind of half tapped out. But in terms of, I mean, I don't think anybody here that, you know, there's 500 people watching this. I don't think any of us are not of the understanding that a number of these players are going to leave the football club. My concern is the situation, the mess we found ourselves in is due to poor squad management from the sporting director, which is Johan Lang. Now, if we are struggling massively in the Premier League, and when we do sign players, it seems to be the same type of profiles, and we don't seem to change from that depending on what system we're going in, which then doesn't work. It's just getting us to where we are. I'm quite concerned about going into the Championship with a big upheaval in very, very good football players, because they are very good on their day. They've won the Europa League. Some of them have won the World Cup, the Copa America, the Euros, all sorts of things. So they are good players on their day. We're then going to put the potential future rebuild into somebody that's effectively got us into this situation. Now, Johan Lang has had a lot of press and a lot of comments around online in the Spurs community. What's your feeling about him post this summer? Because for me, I can't envision another season with him at the football club, but obviously you're in a lot better position than I am. Is there anything that you're potentially hearing at all?
It's not necessarily anything I'm hearing, but I would certainly agree that you know, his job is going to come under serious scrutiny regardless of what happens this season, because as you say, you know, the decision making from the top down, especially around recruitment, has been, you know, really, really poor. And so, you know, like with any job, you are going to face scrutiny and criticism if things don't go well, and by that nature, your job will become at risk. So yeah, I certainly haven't heard either way whether, you know, they are thinking about it, but you know, common sense would dictate that after the season Spurs have had, there has to be some very serious conversations about the decision making that's led them to get to this place. You know, they need to complete a sort of thorough review of how they approach things, whether that's recruitment, whether that's the medical team, you know, all of these things. And for that, Johan Langer obviously has to take quite a lot of responsibility alongside Vinay Venkatesan. So yeah, they seem like honest enough guys to have those conversations with themselves as much as other people having them with them. So, you know, those conversations will definitely happen for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of Tottenham fans would be expecting some kind of change at the top, whether that be, you know, Vinay or Johan. I mean, for me, you know, you look at Vinay and I think a lot of people, again, you've got to put some blame on him. But I think, you know, people maybe expect maybe a timeline of expectation for him might be a couple of years being the CEO. It's, you know, if you want to make real change, it might take more than just, you know, a year of him being in charge. With Johan Langer, I feel like you can kind of judge him off of window to window, because that is really his job, to find players and sort out transfers in and out, being the sporting director. That is his main role. And you could say somewhat he's failing with that, with the situation Spurs are in. So I'm sure people would expect some kind of change there. I think one thing we know we probably won't be having any change on is Roberto De Zerbi. We know he's going to be in charge. He's kind of confirmed that, even with, you know, whatever happens, depending, you know, with Spurs getting relegated, he will be in charge, which would be very, you know, quite a crazy thing to say. You know, Roberto De Zerbi being quite a big manager, well-respected manager, being in the Championship would be quite shocking. But I guess with the size of Tottenham, I'm sure he'd hope to bounce straight back. With his system that he's played with Brighton, with Marseille, with Shakhtar Sassuolo, who do you think could excel in this Spurs team long term? I think at the moment there is plenty of players that maybe don't fit that system, but out of this club, maybe it could be even some of the younger players like Luca Williams-Barnett, like Mikey Moore or Vuskovic even. I mean, that will be a very interesting one to see what happens with him going into the summer and even the next couple of years. But who could maybe excel in this system more than others, do you feel?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are obviously players that he's name-checked. Again, Matthias Tell being one of those. Another player that whilst he was Marseille manager, he tried to sign. So those players, Matthias Tell, Conor Gallagher, they're players that De Zerbi likes. They're players that he thinks their profile fits the system that he wants to play. I also think, it's crazy to think we're saying this sort of maybe a month on from Madrid, but Kinski is someone that, due to his, abilities on the ball, and I think he showed that against Sunderland, his composure and his ability to play out, that's something that De Zerbi likes from his goalkeepers. And so with Vicario, probably out the door come the summer, regardless of what happens, whether they stay or go down. I think there's definitely an opportunity there for Kinski, and he's someone who fits the system well. And yeah, I mean, in terms of recruitment, Romero and Van der Ven are, talented defenders, but do they necessarily fit what De Zerbi wants from his defenders? Players who are, comfortable on the ball, comfortable taking on pressure and playing out from that? Not necessarily. So I think, with those two out the door, there's then an opportunity there to address that and sign players appropriately for those two positions as well.
Do you think we've been linked with Marcus Senesi, Van Hecke, and obviously Andrew Robertson as well? Do you think he's having a say in them? Because there was a big talk when he first came in, wasn't there, that he was going to get this quote unquote Sir Alex Ferguson type role, where he's perhaps going to get a little bit more say in things, like an old school manager. I've referred to on a number of of our shows. Sky actually do a really good documentary where it talks about transfer 360, and it'll be old transfers where you sit and watch. One that I watched was Gareth Barry, and it was actually the two managers talking about them negotiating with each other, and that just doesn't happen anymore. Maybe is Roberto De Zerbi, do you think, having these opinions, or is it more the case that he's signing off? And because obviously there's been a lot of links with those particular players right now, but it's kind of difficult depending on what league we're going to be in.
Yeah, a lot of these deals. I mean, the Robertson, for example, it's certainly stated, it's certainly reported that deal hinges on whether Tottenham are in the Premier League. A deal like Robertson, I would say is probably separate, because that's a long-standing interest that was obviously there from January and even before then. So perhaps not with Robertson, but there's no doubt in my mind that De Zerbi's negotiated a very favourable sort of position for himself, whether that's with the contract he's signed, but also the assurances he's had about his ability to have a say in the players that they sign. So no, I think he would absolutely have have a big say in the players that are bought in. And obviously it's quite a precise, quite a technical system that he wants to play eventually further down the line. So, these players have to be the right profiles. They can't sign, a jack of all trades, as it were. It has to be someone who's, especially say in defence, comfortable on the ball, comfortable under pressure. So, those are very specific profiles. And so De Zerbi would almost certainly have a say in who comes through the door.
I like the fact that he's going to be having that say, actually, because, like you say, the complexities of the formation and the style. And then we're not leaving it really in one particular person's hands in Yang Lang, which essentially probably is going to misprofile what De Zerbi actually wants. And it's quite refreshing to hear that. hopefully him and maybe Rafa Morrissey can all combine and rebuild the squad, because it really does need rebuilding. I know a number of fans, but perhaps for whatever way, thinking going down is a hard reset, but coming out of the Championship is going to be very difficult, and is even being more difficult because there'll be less players at the standard that Roberto De Zerbi demands. But it's going to be an interesting time. Joseph, I'll just come to you for one more question. I've got one more, and then we'll end it for the night. But Joseph, just anything further from yourself?
I think one question, I don't know how much you'll know on this, Sam. When we discuss a lot about young players at the club, some of these exciting prospects, you could say, obviously some may be brought in, like Matthias Tell, like Odebear, like Bergvall, and Archie Gray. But then there's also ones currently at the club who kind of come through the youth, like Williams Barnett. You've got Olasasi, who's also played a couple of games, Janai Byfield. Obviously we want to see an avenue for these players to come into the team. Maybe obviously dropping down to the Championship may allow that. And again, we don't know what's going to happen yet. There's a chance Spurs could stay up, but is there any of those players that you feel De Zerbi may like from what you've seen of them? Again, obviously, there's even players currently playing in the Championship. We've seen Will Lancashire, Jamie Donnelly, both have quite good seasons. Min Hyuk Yang has also done okay. There's a number of players
Alfie
there.
Devine's been great as well.
Exactly, Alfie Devine, another one. I'm sure a lot of fans would like to see some of these players, because these players to me feel like Tottenham because they've kind of lived it. They've grown up with it. Mikey Moore is one that I absolutely love because he's been at Tottenham since he was about 7. It might even be younger than that. He's been here for such a long time, and he might truly know what it feels like to be a Tottenham fan as well as a player. I'm sure a lot of fans would love to see them in the Championship. Do you feel like there's any of those that could shine with De Zerbi?
Yeah, there's certainly an opportunity for them. Absolutely. In terms of players that I think could potentially shine, I mean, I guess we haven't seen too many players get first team opportunities, but one player that I think probably would suit De Zerbi is Olasesi. I mean, when he came on against Liverpool, a lot of the things that I spoke about, this idea of playing quickly and taking the ball under pressure and playing out through pressure, those were all things that Olasesi showed when he came on at Anfield. So he's a player who I think is probably ready for more minutes as well. Certainly in the Championship he would be. It's a player who in January, generated quite a lot of interest from Championship clubs, and it was certainly a consideration that he might go out on loan to a Championship club. So yeah, he's someone who I feel is ready. And also profiles pretty well with what De Zerbi wants from his players. And then again, the players you've talked about, Donnelly, Lancashire, these are players with EFL experience, and that can be important. And I wouldn't necessarily say that they're players who are going to come straight into the first team, but to have them around the squad and to give them minutes, that would be invaluable. And away from the pressures of Premier League football, because I think that's been a big thing is, how can you expect Thomas Frank, but then Igor Tudor and now De Zerbi to chuck in these youngsters who have, perhaps sort of, I think Olasesi's probably played about 63 minutes of senior football. You can't chuck them in at, when the pressure is as it is in a Premier League game. There's just, it would be irresponsible to do that for their development, but also for Tottenham's hopes of staying in the Premier League. So if relegation happens, playing Championship football, perhaps that provides opportunities for these players. And, that could be a welcome sort of benefit of sorts. I mean, there's obviously very little benefit in relegation. I don't think any fan would, that's obviously not the ideal situation, but if the worst was to happen, that's maybe a little bit, that's something that you can take away from it. I think those players will definitely get game time for sure.
Well, we hope the relegation doesn't happen. Obviously, this weekend is probably one of the biggest games, I think, in the club's history, really. Brighton is as much as of a must-win as you possibly could get in terms of fixture. How do you see a couple of sort of sub-questions from the same one, but how do you see Roberto De Zerbi lining up? Do you think Xavi Simons comes back in? And where's your gut feeling sitting right now? Because for me, as I said a minute ago, if this is a defeat, I'm struggling to see us coming back, because those around us will probably almost certainly pick up points again this weekend due to favourable fixtures.
Yeah. So I think in terms of lineup, there's not going to be a ton of change, but I would certainly like to see Xavi Simons come in. I think that midfield, as I say, that combination did not work, so you need to see change in that regard. And for me, that change comes from playing Simons. I'd be interested to see maybe whether Basuma is someone that De Zerbi can sort of get a tune out of. I think he probably fits what he wants quite well. There's obviously question marks about how fit he is, though. And then at left wing, I don't think Richarlison was particularly impressive, and I think Tell's been deserving of minutes for a very long time, and so he certainly has to come in on the left for me. But as I say, not a ton of change. With regards to result, I completely agree. If it's not a win, then really we are staring at the bare truth of it, that Tottenham are the heavy favourites at that point to go down, especially, West Ham and Forest pick up points like they did last weekend. Brighton, they're in good form. They had a little bit of a lull sort of mid-season, and there were some question marks around Hurtzler, but they seem to have really regrouped, and they've got momentum on their side. So it's definitely not an easy game, by no means, but it is certainly a must-win.
Absolutely. Just before we do sign, I did want to ask you one more question. Being obviously a journalist, etc., if Tottenham Hotspur did go into the Championship, do you think that'd be the biggest story you've ever worked on?
Yeah, absolutely the biggest story I've ever worked on. Probably up there with Leicester's title win in terms of the biggest story I've ever experienced. I don't think it can be sort of overstated quite how big this is. Tottenham going down, it's in quite the opposite. It's not running out of superlatives. It's very much the opposite of that. Describing what that means in terms of the history of the Premier League, and having never seen anything like it, it's really quite hard to explain the gravity of that. I think even Everton before that, their success was still sort of 20, 25 years behind them by the point that they were facing relegation trouble. So in terms of a historic club going down so close to previous success, I think it's unparalleled. I don't think there's been an instance like it.
Well, I really hope, Sam, I don't have to read that article from you. I'm praying. I've got my fingers crossed.
I hope I don't have to write it. Yeah.
I really hope you don't have to write it. I hope I don't have to read it, and I really hope and pray I do not have to come on and stare at this screen and talking to. There's about 500 people right now, but normally we get a few thousand of talking about Tottenham Hotspur being in the Championship. I'm hoping and praying. As I say, going into this weekend, for me, it's a 6-pointer. It's the biggest game since the last time I said it was the biggest game. But this is it for me. I think if there is a defeat here, unfortunately, I don't see us coming back. Joseph, you're already of that opinion. It's perhaps over for you, which is a shame. And I'm sure there's a number of people.
It's hard to see. It's hard to see this changing after, the year it's been. And especially since obviously the turn of the year in terms of results and performances, it's just we need things to flip on its head, and there is nothing that gives me that feeling that's going to happen. So
we don't have a player where you can just go, they're going to change things for us. There isn't a Harry Kane or a Song or a Gareth Bale or a Ginola or somebody that's just going to flip the game on their head and say, I'm going to take this. The only ones perhaps we could have are on the treatment table right now, and they're not going to affect us. But Sam, I really appreciate you coming back on. Love hearing from you. Love hearing about all of your travels as well, and seeing pictures as well in Japan. Very jealous. Joseph, I'm sure we'll be back again together for another therapy session at the weekend. Again, thanks to the just over 500 people watching us right now. Please do go and give Sam a follow over on X. Does some great work in and around Tottenham and all football general as well. Myself and Joseph everybody at Project Spurs, again, thank you for joining us, and enjoy the football tonight. Come on, Bayern Munich and Harry Kane.